Professor Bhattacharya, Professor Das, Professor Danta, distinguished guests, members of the faculty, Dr. Devashish Mohapatra, members of the student community, members of the administrative staff, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be part of this seminar, which promises so much. By the end of the second day, we hope we will have attended a truly fulfilling event. I'm also honored to be part of this seminar that's been organized to felicitate, honor Professor Madan Mohan Sharma. As we've known for years now, Professor Sharma is a multifaceted personality and has made a huge contribution to language and literature. Though the sun will soon set on his illustrious teaching career at this university, I'm sure it'll never set on his work as a researcher, translator, and writer. So here's wishing you all success, sir, in everything you choose to do from the 1st of April. Since native speakers of English are no longer regarded as the sole owners of English, don't non-native speakers of English have a stake, a significant stake, in the use and advocacy of English? I thought I'd share a few thoughts with you on the idea of the ownership of English and the critical notion of identity in relation to English in particular. Many of you must have read the poetry of the late Marquis Qureshi. Marquis Qureshi was a Parsi. Born in 1927 in Kolkata, she spent her early childhood in Ranchi, and she also spent a considerable amount of time in Europe, particularly in Germany, where her parents worked initially. When they settled in Karachi, Pakistan, before partition for professional reasons, she married a Pakistani and taught English literature in the Karachi University for over 30 years. Given this background, what was Marquis Qureshi's identity? She herself explored her identity in one of her best-known poems, Kittens, Kittens. And here it is. There are too many kittens. Even the cat is dismayed at this overestimation of her stock and slinks away. Kind friends cannot adopt them all. My relatives say, take them to a bazaar and let them go each to his destiny. They'll live off pickings. But they're so small, somebody may step on them like a tomato. Or, too fastidious to soil a polished shoe, will kick it out of his path. If they survive the gaunt dogs and battering heels, they will starve gently, squealing a little less each day. The European thing to do is drown them. Warm water is advised to lessen the shock. They're so small, it takes only a minute. You hold them down and turn your head away. Then the water shatters, your hands are frantic eels, oddly like landed fish, their blunt mouths open and shut. Legs strike out, each claw a delicate nail paring is bared. They are blind and will never know you did this to them. The water recomposes itself. Snagged by two cultures, which shall I choose? Asks Marquis Qureshi. John Adams, the second president of the United States of America, foresaw the inexorable spread of English when he remarked in 1780, and I quote, "English will be the most respectable language in the world and most universally read and spoken in the next century, if not before the close of this one." Unquote. But Adam's prophetic words didn't quite predict the extraordinarily dominant role it now plays internationally in crucial areas like education, science, technology, law, and business. A member of the faculty at a French business school, Kai Chan, has developed something he calls a Power Language Index, 2018. And this index weighs each language's influence over geography, economy, communication, knowledge and media, and diplomacy. Not surprisingly, his study shows that English is clearly the world's most powerful language, way ahead of Mandarin, French, Spanish, Arabic, Russian, German, Japanese, Portuguese, and Hindi. Hindi comes at number 10. We therefore seem to have reached a point in history where a world without English is evidently inconceivable, at least in this generation. Now, how has this impacted India? The relentless march of minority endangered languages in India towards extinction is a matter of concern for linguists, educationists, anthropologists, and intellectuals. And in this regard, the spread of English has been perceived by some as a threat to minority languages and as a contributor to linguicide, the word that we use to describe the depth of languages. English has spread so rapidly throughout the world, the fear is that it has perhaps become a global language at the cost of other languages, David Crystal's point of view. Scholars like Robert Phillipson feel that English has been playing the role of lingua Frankenstein instead of that of a lingua franca. This, of course, is a throwback to the post-independence distrust of retaining English in school and college education. And the report of the University Education Commission of India, famous quote, 1948, stated, "The use of English as such divides the people into two nations, the few who govern and the many who are governed, the one unable to talk the language of the other and mutually uncomprehending." This is a negation of democracy, said the Commission. In a fascinating book titled Planet Word, not World, Planet Word, published in 2011, the author, J.P. Davidson, recalls what a Hawaiian woman said to her granddaughter, in 1896, and I quote, "Learn well the language of the whites. Do not rely on our language. There's no value there. One's future well-being is dependent on mastering the language of the foreign people." Unquote. Perception, then, is that deliberate prominence being accorded to English in our school education in particular would only alienate Indian children from their cultural roots and reduce their esteem for their own languages, which in turn would lead to cultural atrophy. Excuse me. However, many scholars who represent the marginalized sections in India believe that English has an emancipatory role to play. Kanche Laya, Chandraban Prasad and Meena Kandaswamy, among the many, view it as a language of empowerment for the disadvantaged like Dalits and the Adivasis. Their perception is that English is the acknowledged gateway to modern scientific knowledge, accelerated economic growth, and upward social mobility. There is a strong argument in favor of English and English education for children from the marginalized and underprivileged segments of the Indian society. This perception also accounts for the socio-political pressure that has led to English being introduced as a subject of study from the earliest levels in primary school in most Indian states. Sorry. It's worthwhile reminding ourselves that India is a country of great diversity, especially in its linguistic manifestation. 71 years after independence, we have not only retained English, but we continue to assimilate English into ourselves. In an earlier era, English was regarded as the language of the intelligentsia, who allegedly used it as an instrument of linguistic imperialism and social intimidation. But today, particularly from the parental perspective, English is perceived as the language of opportunity and socio-economic empowerment. Therefore, a language policy for its deployment in school and college needs to emerge from a consensus between the reality of a multilingual society and societal aspirations. In other words, we need to acknowledge the fact that English is taught by Indians to Indians so that we can interact with one another in the country and with the world. English has indeed become a global language in a multilingual nation. As the relentless march of English continues, two trends have been particularly noticeable. One, the notion of English as a British or American language has diminished in value. Two, its future is not going to be determined only by its native speakers. Its future will also be directed by its non-native speakers for whom the language has become their other tongue. Other tongue is the term Raj Kachur used in 1992. Indeed, what we have today is not one homogeneous, monolithic language called English, but many heterogeneous varieties or Englishes. Larry Smith, in a very popular book called Discourse Across Cultures, that he edited in 1987, said, English already represents many cultures and it can be used by anyone to express any cultural heritage and any value system. Given then that Indian speakers of English have developed their own linguistic norms, the critical question of identity has to be addressed in the Indian context. As professionals immersed in language education, you and me, and as writers wishing to express our identity through literature, like the many creative writers we have here, which variety should we use? In the case of English language teaching, should we adopt the internationally recognized variety simply referred to as Standard English? Or should we recommend the use of the national variety, simply referred to as Indian English? Or should we quietly promote the regional variety, like Assamese English, which is the variety, incidentally, that our learners are overwhelmingly exposed to in the classroom? As you must have realized, it isn't an easy decision to make. In the case of literary expression, should Indian writers decide on Standard English, which would enable them to address an international audience? Or should they unabashedly use the Indian variety to give their work a distinct Desi voice? Or should they stay with their first language and not write in English at all? The late Kamala Das captured this conflict between language choice and identity in her much anthologized poem and introduction, which she published as part of a longer work, Summer in Calcutta, in 1966, 1965, 66. And here is a part of that poem called An Introduction. I don't know politics, but I know the names of those in power and can repeat them like days of the week or names of months beginning with Nehru. I'm Indian, very brown, born in Malabar. I speak 3 languages, write in 2, dream in 1. Don't write in English, they said. English is not your mother tongue. Why not leave me alone? Critics, friends, visiting cousins, every one of you. Why not let me speak in any language I like? The language I speak becomes mine, its distortions, its queernesses, all mine, mine alone. It is half English, half Indian, funny perhaps, but it is honest. It is as human as I am human, don't you see? It voices my joys, my longings, my hopes, and it is useful to me as cawing is to crows or roaring to the lions. It is human speech, the speech of the mind that is here and not there, a mind that sees and hears and is aware, said Kamala Das. It's also worthwhile recalling Raja Rao's visionary statement in his foreword to Kantapura in 1937, long time ago, and I quote, "We're all instinctively bilingual, many of us writing in our own language and in English. We cannot write like the English. We should not. We cannot write only as Indians. We have grown to look at the large world as part of us. Our method of expression, therefore, has to be a dialect which will someday prove to be as distinctive and colourful as the Irish or the American. The tempo of Indian life must be infused into our English expression." Now, Raja Rao's statement foregrounds 2 issues that are in apparent conflict: internationalism and identity. Scholars argue that in internationalism, a nation looks out from itself at the world as a whole, in what you might call a centrifugal fashion, and tries to position its beliefs and practices in relation to the world. On the other hand, in the case of identity, a nation looks within itself at the architecture of its own society, in what you might call a centripetal fashion, and tries to define its beliefs and practices against the backdrop of its national identity. When internationalism and identity influence the role of English in India, 2 important issues arise. Firstly, internationalism suggests intelligibility. That is, if as Indians we want to interact with the English-speaking world, then clearly we are obliged to use a variety of English that is intelligible across national boundaries. This means that we adopt a mutually agreed standard in aspects like grammar, vocabulary, spelling, pronunciation, and conventions of use. And to go back to Davidson in Planet Worth, there is a reference to the work of Jean-Paul Nerrier and the concept of intelligibility. Nerrier, a retired British businessman, was for some time a vice president of IBM in the US, and he was in charge of international marketing. As part of his job, he traveled extensively across the world doing business with different nationalities in English. As a native speaker, he had to frequently adapt his English to the language competence of his non-native speaker business client, and that, he says, was a challenging task. What Nerrier observed in his business interactions was that non-native speakers communicated with each other more efficiently and easily than with native English speakers. So whether it was a Japanese talking to a Korean or a Moroccan talking to a Hungarian, the simple, basic form of English they used was mutually comprehensible and got the job done. Nerrier says that on the other hand, the English used by native speaker businessmen was too complicated and idiomatic for the purpose. And because they made no effort to simplify or adapt their English, they lost lucrative contracts to non-native speaker businessmen. Incidentally, as a consequence of his experiences, Nerrier developed a simplified form of business English called Globish, Global English, Globish, which he is currently busy marketing. Secondly, identity subsumes the notion of individuality. That is, if as Indians we wish to assert our unique identity, we must discover and sustain avenues for expressing our uniqueness. Our festivals, folklore, music, dance, drama, films and customs all contribute to our individuality. So does a national variety of English, a Desi variety that is distinctive in grammar, accent, vocabulary, spelling, pronunciation and conventions of use follow suit? How English plays out in India in the next few decades, therefore, will depend crucially on how the tension between internationalism and identity is resolved. In the meanwhile, let us appreciate the multifarious functions that English performs in multilingual and multicultural settings in the country. Learners, teachers, and teacher educators all need to be persuaded to regard English not merely as a utilitarian acquisition, but as a major contributor to personal development and an invaluable tool for understanding India's pluralistic society. In a lecture that he gave at EFLU Hyderabad in 2014, Kumara Vadivelu, who teaches in San Jose, USA, said, "One's cultural growth should be rooted in one's own cultural traditions, but also must be enriched by an ability and willingness to learn not only about other cultures, but also from other cultures. Learning about other cultures merely leads us to cultural literacy. It is learning from other cultures that will lead us to cultural liberty." Clearly, more than an Aadhaar card or a passport, what defines us is our language and accent. A teacher of English recently asked me, "How would you describe yourself, sir? What is your identity?" And I remember saying, "Well, I'm an English-speaking Tamilian from Kannada-speaking Bengaluru, settled in Telugu-speaking Hyderabad, and married to a Hindi-speaking Punjabi from Himachal Pradesh. I have two sons, one in the UK and one in the US, whose first language is English, and who are married to Malayalam speakers from Delhi and Mumbai. And I also have a 7-year-old English-speaking granddaughter who's studying at the Cambridge University Primary School and learning Bharatanatyam in Cambridge." That makes me a Khichdi Indian, doesn't it? Thank you very much.